Please be seated. A friend of mine used to belong to a church where once they were done with their Good Friday liturgy, with the readings and the music and the prayers and the silence, much like we're doing here today, after it was all done, people were invited to take flowers from an altar area and go and lay them in an area of their city where a brutal crime had taken place sometime during that past year. That's all. Simply lay the flowers on the sidewalk or in the grass or in the street where something horrible had happened. You could stay and pray for a moment if you desired, but the only really necessary thing was to bring some of the holy things of church to the holy streets of that city. My friend told me that if you really wanted a challenge, you could lay the flowers down and then remain there while you sang or listened to the song, "Were you there when they crucified my Lord?" But most people didn't, or couldn't, because it forced them to come face to face with the truth that the violence of the events of Good Friday in the first century are a reality in the 21st century. Last night, as this altar area was being stripped at the end of our Maundy Thursday service, Father Chris stood right down here and chanted the 22nd Psalm. I had never experienced that before. I've read Psalm 22 dozens and dozens of times, but I had never heard it sung before. And I'm not exactly sure what happened, but something happened within me. Something happened to me. It got in. The words didn't get filtered. And they got in. My God, why have you forsaken me? It's different when it's sung. And here today, on this good yet also brutal and horribly violent Friday, as we hear the story of Jesus' trial, the twisted thorns as a crown, the flogging, the stripping, the words, "I'm thirsty." My prayer is that we all let it in. The reality is that we as human beings don't really know what to do with Good Friday. Most of us struggle to make sense of the love and the grace and the peace that is displayed to us from the cross. We tend to either see it as something so big and vast and expansive that we simply turn from it because it's just too much. Or we sink into guilt as though God were looking at us and saying, "What's wrong with you?" But that's not a God-like response to guilt or rejection. That's a human response. And maybe that's what Good Friday is really all about. It's about recognizing the difference between the divine and human, and letting that difference in, even if just for a moment. And I do get why we'd rather not let it in. The narrative that we have built for ourselves is that we can be our own gods. we can take care of our own needs. Or we make the gospel or any form of spirituality primarily about achieving an existence somewhere else, anywhere other than here. The reality is, however, that what happened on the cross happened here. Looking for or expecting the full presence of God in another realm is our attempt to escape this place because it just might be too painful to let God in here or here. I heard a preacher once say that Good Friday just might be the best place to experience the pain of an unfiltered reality. In Matthew's account of Jesus' execution, at the moment of his death, Matthew testifies that the curtain in the temple was torn from top to bottom, leaving no barrier between the most holiest of holy places and the people. Another preacher describes Good Friday as if the atmosphere were suddenly disappeared and we were left exposed to the blazing sun. Not that we need to be protected from God, as some versions of faith have told us, but rather, if we were regularly exposed to that unfiltered reality of God's love and grace and peace, it just might be too much for us to handle. Perhaps it's a good thing that we only experience Good Friday once a year. I'm not sure we could stomach it on a regular basis. But again, Good Friday happens every day in our world. And despite the pain and the suffering and the stress and the anxiety and all of the violence around us, as Father Chris preached about on Wednesday evening, there is a golden thread that is woven throughout the events of Holy Week. A thread that displays that hope is never lost, that the light of God is never fully extinguished. A thread that reminds us that in this gospel story that we tell, death isn't the end of that story. It's a new beginning. It's almost as if we can look at the question, were you there when they crucified my Lord? As a really good question on this Good Friday. Amen.